We're gonna get going, so you guys can still grab some food. The acoustics are pretty good in here, but we don't have mics, so if you guys want to like come closer, if you can't hear well or something, we can go that way. So I know you guys are probably sick of hearing me talk, but this is the second part of the Life of the Deal series, right? And so last week, you guys remember hearing about the development process, land use attorney, and brokerage of how do you find a site and how do you start the entitlements and permit process. So we're moving into this week where we have architects, engineers, and general contractors are talking about, okay, what happens now? How do you take that plan? How do you take, you know, the portion of the entitlements, the plan, like the overall concept, and then how do you end up in a building kind of like where you guys are sitting here now? The other thing I wanted to say is just thanks for everybody for taking the time here. I know you have different schedules, you have supervisors, you have work requirements. Appreciate it for coming out here today and taking time out of your schedule and also checking out the Kimley-Horn office. We'll get started now, so it'll be similar to last week. They're going to run through kind of a panel, and you know we've done a lot of prep work of like kind of outlining the overall process to you. So make sure you're thinking about questions at the end. We'll save some time for that, and enjoy hearing from some of the rock star MVPs in the industry in the architectural, construction, and engineering world. With that being said, I'm going to turn it over to our moderator, Chris Beza, and you got the show.
Okay. Thanks everyone for coming and taking some time out from your day to hear this panel. So my name is Chris Beza. I'm a principal and commercial market director at NBBJ Architects here in Seattle, and I'm going to let the panel introduce themselves. I mean, we have Tony Vongdara next to me with HITT Contracting, Tim Zielke, who's an architect with Mackenze, and Cassie Kussow, who's an engineer with Kimley-Horn. So I'll let you all introduce yourselves, and what we're going to do today is spend maybe the first few minutes talking about our, how we came to be in the positions that we're in today, a little bit about our backgrounds and careers, and then we're going to take maybe 20, 30 minutes to talk about how we collaborate together to design and deliver a project. And then we'll spend the last few minutes just talking sort of closing thoughts on our career trajectories, maybe talk about the state of the market a little bit, and then we'll take some questions. Of course, if something comes up and you're burning to ask, please feel free to raise your hand and we can address questions in the middle of our discussion as well, if that makes sense. So Tony, we'll start with you.
Sure.
Tell us a little bit about your life history.
Okay.
In 2 minutes.
Yeah. Tony Vongdara, Senior Project Manager for HITT Contracting. So we're a general contractor here in Seattle. We're also a national GC. Our headquarters is actually in Falls Church, Virginia. But we have an office here right by the stadiums, right above King 5, for those of you that are familiar with the area around here, but we're on the top floor. So
we'll be going there for the closing event.
Yeah, so you'll see a pretty damn good view of the stadiums from there. But anyways, general contracting, so we're, for those of you that don't know that term, but we're the ones responsible for bringing the plans and everything into actual physical construction. So we'll coordinate with trades and subcontractors like electricians, mechanical subs, and bring it all together to build spaces like this. So that's me.
Tony, how'd you end up there?
Ooh, so I didn't know what I wanted to do. Like when I went into college, all I knew was I didn't want to go to a state school. I grew up in Olympia. I didn't want to go to state school, no offense, but half my high school is going to one of the 2 state schools. So I ended up going to University of Puget Sound, which is in Tacoma, liberal arts school, but they had a dual degree engineering program. All I knew is I didn't want to go to state school and I was good at math. So decided to go that track, and what they have is a 5-year program where I spent basically 3 years. You had to major in math, chemistry, or physics, and then you transition to an engineering school. So again, I didn't know what I wanted to do, but ended up falling into the mathematics and civil engineering track. So did math in UPS, and then 2 years for civil engineering in Columbia in New York. So while I was there, I did a couple internships for structural engineering and construction management, and that's when I realized construction management spoke more to me and aligned with what I wanted to do. So that's when I decided, all right, going to finish this 5-year program. It's been too long. I'm just going to go with it and see what it's like going the GCCM route. So been in the industry now 17 years, 6 years with my current company, but from that point on, just really enjoyed the process of building and collaborating with team members like this and the community and you all eventually. So that's me in a nutshell.
Thanks, Tony. Tim?
All right, I'm Tim Zielke, architect and project manager at Mackenze. Been practicing architecture for about 25 years now. Started in Michigan, came out here in 2010, been doing architecture with a couple different firms in the Seattle area, primarily in high-rise, multifamily mixed-use projects for a large portion of that, and kind of got into that my late 20s. That was, I would say, a pivotal point in my career in terms of getting into really a comfort zone in terms of architecture. I had a really good mentor who, walked me through all the stages. I kind of just started in as a CAD person, and within a year I was doing all the CA, all the, slab edge drawings and all of that, and with his guidance, just really found what I loved about architecture, kind of found that, which was basically taking an idea, right, something that's in somebody's head, and you make that a physical reality that now thousands, tens of thousands of people get to live in or experience, which to me is just an incredible thing that we get to do, in this industry, right? We're taking something that was just in someone's brain and making it real. So that's a little bit about me.
That's great. Cassie?
Yeah, so I'm Cassie Kussow. I have been with Kimley-Horn for 11 years. I think I'm probably the oddity that I actually started with Kimley-Horn right out of school and have been here the entire time. I grew up in Wisconsin. I'm a diehard Green Bay Packers fan, so sorry for the Seahawks fans in the room. It's okay. I went to school at Michigan Tech, which is in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and I always joke that Kimley-Horn catfished me to coming to Kimley-Horn because my first interned and got an offer from Phoenix, Arizona, our office, and they interviewed me in November, so it's 70 and perfect, and I was like, yeah, I'll sign. Where do I sign? How do I get here? And then I moved and it was 120 and hot and miserable, and I was like, oh no, what have I done? So during that time, I started in Phoenix, was there for a year, and then we opened an office in northern Arizona, and I kind of raised my hand because I wanted out of the valley and went up there. So I was there for a couple years, and then eventually always wanted to be in the Puget Sound. So when we opened our Seattle office about 6 years ago, I was like, hey, I'm happy to be there. And so I was number 8 in opening this office. We sit at about 100 people today, and so that's been over 6 years. So it's been fun to be part of that. So I'm a civil engineer by education, but I would say a project manager by experience. Meaning that, I started, Kendall here, she was in the internship program a couple years ago, doing what she's doing today, which is, preparing drawings to get ready for a submittal that we have. But now I work much more, as Tim said, helping ideas come from a concept to paper. I don't know, did anyone ever play SimCity? That might not, transfer, but that's was me, right? I wanted to, or even Sims, right? I always loved laying out the house and laying out the streets and the sidewalk and where do the pipes go and how does it all fail. And so I kind of knew I wanted to be an engineer from, I think it was 9th grade, and I was like, all right, this is what I want to do. So a little bit unique in that regard, that I was pretty well set on what I wanted to do, but didn't really know that I was going to go into commercial and industrial development. And so I do a lot of work with Costco, Target and big box developers, but also local industrial developers. And I always laugh when Tim talks about making the ideas come to fruition. I don't think people think about the dirt oftentimes, right? You see the pretty picture when people are imagining something, it's flat, or how the utilities get there, what the drainage infrastructure is. So as a civil engineer, it's a lot of what's underground and how do we get it there, and how do we get a flat site. And so it's a lot of the problem solving of how do we get those pretty things to work. So.
Great, thanks. I realize I haven't said anything about myself. My name is Chris Beza. I'm a principal at NBBJ Architects. So NBBJ is about an 800-person architecture firm, international architecture firm. We've done a lot of work in the Seattle area. It was founded here, and some of our notable projects would include the Spheres for Amazon and the new ferry terminal. We do a lot of Justice Center work. My role there is a commercial and corporate market lead. So I develop business for in the corporate, meaning workplace, and commercial, meaning developer-led projects for the firm. So I build relationships and help bring those kinds of projects into the firm for work. So that's a big part of what I do, as well as manage client relationship for Microsoft and manage projects directly. So it's just kind of seller-doer environment for us. So that's my role, and I've been at that practicing architecture for about 30 years. I did a lot of work in retail previously, a lot of work overseas in the Middle East and in the Far East and in Russia over the years, mostly master planning. But lately it's all been here in the Puget Sound area. So, okay, so what we want to talk about now is like, how do we design and deliver a project, and what do those relationships look like between architects, engineers, and contractors? Now I know it varies depending on the delivery method, whether it's GCCM or progressive design build or design bid build. Should we talk about those relationships and how they might vary across the different project delivery methods?
Yeah.
Who wants to start?
I can start. I think a little bit when we talk about how, I'll say, regardless of the design, the delivery method, and then we can go into the delivery method, is
Yep.
I'm going to use a sports metaphor because that's how I work. So apologies for those that have no idea what I'm about to talk about, but I'll bring it around. I think of design teams, and including the GC, as like a zone defense for basketball. And the fact that like you have an assigned responsibility, but when we're working at our best, there's overlap, right? Like you're sliding over to help out, right? So, you know, I'm checking the MVP plans to make sure it aligns with my plumbing or, you know, dry utility plans and what's coming into the building, right? In the same way that the GC is checking to make sure that, you know, what they're bidding is aligned with what's actually out there, right? So when we're at our best, there's a lot of overlap and we're checking and we're working together. And when we're at our worst, it's when, you know, someone finds a gap between where we didn't coordinate and come through. And which, you know, who's at the front, I think, and who's at the top of the key is probably what really changes, and who's kind of driving that versus the different delivery methods. But when we talk about design, it really is a full team effort to make sure that we're really trying to get the developer, the owner's input and what they want, that vision that Tim talked about, to fruition. And whether that be through the entitlement process and working with the jurisdictions and what their requirements are. You know, sometimes one of the things that we see a lot are like setbacks or those things that, you know, somebody comes to you with a site and a vision and they didn't take into account. There's so many different things that are impacting in different ways. And so if it's just on one person to check all that, usually something will fall. And so we're always leaning on each other to make sure we're checking. And so I don't know if you want to start design bid build.
Yeah. Yeah, so design bid build, or DBD, is one of the project delivery types. So it's often called plan and spec as well, where, you know, the design team will be hired by a client or a developer, and they would be responsible for developing the entire design. So the architects and civil engineers will kind of be working in tandem with the client. And then on the other side is GC, right? So the design team will develop the entire plan, and then GCs will typically bid on those plans. So that's what it means by plan and specifications, right? So you're bidding everything per what the design team had drew. So that's one delivery type where it's basically, again, you design it, you bid it to GCs and builders and subcontractors, and then you build it.
Yeah, and kind of a little bit more on that. Both the contractor and the architect, and then many of the consultants are typically under the consultant or under the architect, so MEP, civil, landscape. Sometimes civil is direct to the client, or both, depending on which portion. And so that triangle, right, of the relationship sometimes makes it a little more difficult, like in terms of communication between the architect and the GC, because they're not contracted to each other, so there's no necessarily, I don't want to say loyalty, but like responsibility to each other. Like you both are, you're trying to work together, but at the end of the day, the client's got to hold it on each of us separately to work together, versus if we're in some of the other methods where I'm contracted directly to Tony, you know, we're definitely on the same page, making sure that the client is staying in line in terms of changes and things like that.
Yeah, I was going to say, to just back it up a little bit, just the triangle that Tim's referring to is like the client or the developer, the owner has the project, and then usually there's two verticals, right, or two legs of the triangle, which is the design team / architecture, civil, and then the GC. So the triangle in this design bid build perspective, there's no bottom leg that connects our design team and the GC, right, contractually. Right? We all flow up to the architect. or the owner. Yeah. So in these other project delivery types, I don't know if you want to get into that now.
Let's see that now, yeah.
Yeah, so.
Well, can I, just
yeah.
one thing I want to bring up on design build. I think one of the things that, from those that are maybe in the room that are on like the owner or, you know, more of the side of the downside of it, beyond this, not the loyalty maybe or like that, is also the GCs bring a lot of value to like current costs to things. And they, like, when they're involved in that process and being able to say like, hey, this material is really expensive right now, or, you know, we could swap this out, what we call value engineering sometimes, that role that they can play in can really help us get a more cost-effective project on the front end versus having to do redesign after, where they come, you know, I was actually just on a project, you know, we submitted it earlier this week, where it was a design bid build, and went out to bid, and it came back way more expensive than they were anticipating. And so then we went back and got a permit revision to reduce the cost, because there was just things that, because the contractor wasn't involved early on, they didn't get that initial feedback or that instantaneous feedback as far as the cost of things, right? So there's a lot of pros and cons to these different ones, and when people get brought in, or like the different teaming partners get brought in, can provide a different value to the end user or the owner.
All right. Yeah, I was going to say, to add to that, design bid build, again, I'm bidding on whatever the designer's designed, right? So if something changes, usually it's back it up, it's usually competitive, where I'm competing against other GCs to win the project. Sometimes it's low dollar, sometimes it's best value, depending on how they want to frame the decision making. But you know, when it's low cost, I'm going to go in with exactly what's on the plan and specs. And if anything changes, like a door moves, or hey, I want to change the lighting, I'm obligated to say, hey, that's a change in scope, here's a change in cost and potentially schedule. So it creates kind of a, I shouldn't say adversarial, but it creates a lot of that gap between the basketball defense, right? Like, we're not working together necessarily. Right?
Yeah, and I think I did a lot of design bid build when I was doing public projects or like for the government, and the idea was that there's a lot of transparency, right? Mm-hmm. So everyone could see the documents. It was advertising it, you know, in publicly, anyone could bid on it, and so it was about creating the sense of transparency. Mm-hmm. But it does create this, in a way, adversarial relationship. And we used to say, yeah, the project could get bigger and it would get more expensive. The project could get smaller and it would get more expensive. It didn't matter if it's design bid build, because it creates a change order for the GC. So, but yeah, let's talk about like a GCCM delivery method and how it's different than design bid build. Is this all interesting to you guys? This is good? Okay. Just want to make sure that you're all feeling like this is great.
If you're sitting there and you're like, it's not, it's okay, you can say no. It's okay. Like, we're kind of nerding out out here. It's totally fine.
I feel like we should use a
I
whiteboard.
just want to make sure that you're all getting value for, you know, beyond lunch value. Okay.
Yeah. I guess, so one thing I'll speak to on the GCCM project type was, I didn't realize that kind of my first big project that I was working on, which was the city center in Las Vegas, was GCCM, right? Kensler was running everybody underneath. Mm-hmm. So to kind of step back, I guess, GCCM seems to be more related when it's a very, very large scale project, where, I mean, city center was 5 hotels, 4, I think, residential towers, a mall, you know, an
Did
entire.
You work on that?
I did. Yeah, I worked on the Mandarin Oriental Hotel.
Wow.
That was how I learned to do high rise on that project. So I was flying out from Michigan once a week doing CA and stuff, which is crazy to me now. But I learned so much just from all the ventures in that project. But
yeah,
to like have one entity managing 20 different architects and 4 different construction companies and all of that.
Yeah.
Like that was what they had, a team of 50 people running. Like, it was, you know, to look back on that this morning when I was like thinking of some things to talk about, I was like, oh yeah, this is definitely that model.
Yeah.
And there was no other way it could have been run.
Yeah. So GCCM is basically, sometimes it's negotiated bid, sometimes there's GMP associated with it. What happens is the design team gets hired by the owner at a certain point, brought on, and then the GC gets brought on separately by the owner, but early in the design phase, usually during feasibility concept studies, very early. And the idea is that the GC can then provide costs and constructability kind of input to the design team as they're designing it, rather than waiting until all the documents are done.
Right.
There's something that they say, like a change early is not that expensive. The further you get along in design and construction, the more expensive any change becomes. And so the idea is that there's a lot of value that a GC brings early in the process to avoid sort of cost later. So
Yeah, I was gonna say CM. So for those that don't know, CM is construction management, right? So going back to the triangle, we're still contractually up to the owner or developer or client, right? So there's still some separation there, but to Chris's point is, you know, we're involved early, so we can provide that feedback that can help manage and drive the design to where it makes sense for the end user, right, or the client, whether it's their budget, schedule, or whatever. We can provide feedback on what's available out there, how quickly we can get the material. If for some reason the architect specs this light fixture and we're like, well, this is 16 weeks out, why don't we spec something that's similar that we can get in 4 weeks, right? So it's more collaborative up front than a design bid build.
Yeah, see, I see this a lot on really large projects or some like public site development projects. That's pretty common. You might also see an owner's rep in this situation a lot, right?
Yeah.
Kind of get introduced to help manage both parties.
Yeah.
I also think, going back to the basketball analogy, this is really when we're at our best, because the GC is really in on that zone defense and they're helping to fill those gaps. I think there's usually a QC process, so if the drawings aren't parallel together, right? If Tim's drawings and my drawings aren't speaking well together, they can usually find that and bring that up now. Versus, you know, if on the other side, they might catch that in the field and then we have to work through that. And I also think the GCs bring a lot of value as far as, have we considered this? And it builds that relationship of kind of just like knocking on all the doors to make sure we've tried everything, so that way we have sometimes the best design. And sometimes the answer is no, right? Not every value engineering proposal is a great proposal. And so sometimes it's just like, hey, we've thought about it. The answer is no, but at least then we've proven to the owner or whoever that we've done our due diligence and that we've tried to make the best product possible.
Right, yeah, and I think this kind of, in terms of being brought on board, like to make that kind of relative, I guess, in terms of when that timing actually occurs. Like in design bid build, I was working on a project and the contractor wasn't brought on board until 60% CDs, which in the timeline of a tower is potentially 2 to 8 years in terms of design development, in terms of early design guidance and all that, versus if that had been GCCM, they would have been on board, you know, 7 years ago, part of the pre-con, all of that, going through like, oh, what does it mean to put a generator on the 6th floor or whatever, and things like that, versus we don't know the answer because they weren't involved.
right.
I think the other value I really see in this, and when we talk about design build next, is the relationship that the GC can have with the jurisdictions. So a huge part of challenge of permitting and building is the jurisdictions, right? Whether it be your inspector, your permit reviewers, those things. And then we have to go back and, you know, we're always kind of like, okay, why do we make these decisions or what drove it where? When the GC can be involved in those conversations to say, hey, the city's asking for this, and they can help, you know, have that conversation, understand, or meet with the inspector early on so they understand why. It really helps improve that relationship in the field, which, I mean, Tony, you can speak to it. Sometimes those relationships don't always go well, but.
Yeah, I wouldn't lean on the relationships too much, but yes, they're there. Because we can work with the jurisdiction and be like, hey, we did this last time, this makes sense. This is how we built it. It still meets code. Are you okay with it? So.
Yeah, there's sometimes a pull planning aspect to that too, in terms of schedule, that GCs bring a lot of value. So with the client, you know, we'll get with the GC and the primary sub-consultants and the client and come together and just do a pull planning where we're really looking at the overall schedule, where we want to be and what we have, what we need, what our sort of deadlines are, and then working backwards to figure out what we need to do to get there and what each party needs to provide to support the schedule. I think that's really a good sort of way to collaborate on schedule and set expectations with the client about what's going to be delivered when, sort of when those kind of where they're headed from a schedule standpoint.
Yeah. I was going to say that was going to segue right well into design build, which is essentially most common is like a traditional design build model is where the client will come to the GC and ask us to engage a design team, which will include team members like, you know, civil and architecture, but also structural, geotech sometimes, right? And we would bring that under our umbrella because the client would want to pursue a design build. So what that does, it's probably not the most PC way to say it, but it's kind of one neck to choke if something goes wrong, right? So if something goes wrong with the project, they'll blame me because I'm technically contracting them. And so backing up a little bit, so design and build.
You're the neck.
I am the neck, big or small, whatever. But usually a client or an end user will have the concept, or sometimes they'll have a BOD, a basis of design, that say like, hey, I want to build this tower. I want it to look like this. I want to have it, you know, a bunch of windows. And then they'll bid it out to GCs and be like, hey, design build contractor, here's my concept. You guys come up with the design and you guys build it, right? So that's where I would team up with team members to come up with a team makeup that would best qualify for the client's needs, right? And then we work together collaboratively because, again, we all work together on a team contractually. So going back to the triangles, right? It's now connected per se, but really it flows down to the GC, to the design team. So.
Yeah, and I would kind of add on, I will say it does make some of our more traditional contractings with consultants a little more complicated because MEP is now contracted to Tony, and so my communication now, instead of direct to Hargis or whoever it might be, would be, hit Tony, I need help with this. Where are these drawings? Then you have to push on whichever or consultant, get that, then it comes back through Tony to me. So that communication sometimes isn't as smooth as always could be. And that's not to say it doesn't happen when they're directly contracted to me either. I think that's just one of the complications of working with, you know, a lot of busy people. You know, what I have appreciated being at Mackenze is it's the first time I've been in an architecture firm that also has structural, civil, landscape, and interior design and land use planning, which to me is like been just like, why don't we do more of this? Because it's just so easy to be like, walk over to the structural guy's desk who's 2 seats away from me and be like, hey, I've got a quick question on what to do with these trusses. And he'll be like, oh, does this, and it's done, versus send an email or phone call, leave a message, and wait, and all that. So I'm really appreciating the model that Mackenze has adopted. And that's not to say that we're still working with Kimley-Horn on projects as civil, because sometimes, you know, we don't have the expertise or we're, you know, overloaded. So that's another piece of that design build contract that can sometimes be simpler if it's all in-house, right? You contracted us, and that way we would have it all, and we could then, and it wouldn't have that 3-step process.
Yeah.
So.
And I think sometimes, like, what is the benefit? I think the benefit could be that, you know, you have the one neck to choke, as much of my neck
Single
PPC.
point of service.
Single point of service, right, sure. You know.
It's already on the recording.
Yeah.
Most of the design build contracts that I've been a part of are, I can think of one, which was a distribution company, a manufacturing company that wanted to do 3 different facilities across the country, right? And so it was really nice that they could hire one GC that had a presence and one design team. And so when they made a decision, hey, this floor needs to be concrete here, it happened on all 3. And so it made the decision process much more simpler. You might pay a premium for that, right? To have, you know, that one point of contact that they don't have to kind of deal with it in that regard. So I think when there's high standards or a high pace, that's where the positives can come from, but you might pay for that in a different way. So again, all of these have benefits and disadvantages, and it's kind of, you know, the owner and who's ever, you know, owning the contract has to kind of weigh those and what they're looking for and what they value the most.
Well, when I think the tie-in, because we've talked about relationships, like to connect it to last week's panel, at the end of the day, it's a schedule and a money piece, right? And there's contractual relationships for like when things go wrong, or just what makes it better for the developer to get to the in-state product. And so understanding these types then generates what the relationships are between those 3 parties with the owner, like Jake, who you guys met last week. You know, every group has a different capacity, right? Like, so, you know, Jake's and Prologis have like a large team, and they do this all over the country, right? And so they maybe are apt to go through some of these other delivery methods. When then there's other shops that it might be like a 4 or 5 person team, where like putting the horsepower and the risk transfer to a design build GC actually benefits their model.
Right.
So like if you're connecting all the dots on how does a deal come together and how do you go from last week, this piece of land, draw a box on the ground, to like delivering a building, all of this is very important and nuanced, and it matters depending on which path you take. So that's kind of the connectivity between that.
Yeah.
And then separately, it drives the relationships between the 3 people sitting on the panel of like, okay, how do we work together, whether you like each other or not, and like move forward contractually.
Yeah. I think what's interesting about, and this is something I've had to point out to our folks, is that we're used to GCCMs primarily. A lot of our work has been that, especially in the corporate world for Amazon and Microsoft. And my experience previously with Nordstrom and retail was always the GCCM. Going to design build or progressive design build, in some ways the mindset is that our client is now the GC because we're contracted to the GC, we're under the GC. So the client is one thing, the people who are paying for this ultimately, but we actually report up to the GC, and so in effect, they are our client. Right. So it's a different mindset than doing a GCCM project where you're working with the client, they're your client, and collaborating across with the GC.
Yeah.
So it's a different idea.
Yeah, I would say like, in my personal experience, design build has become more and more popular as clients and end users decide to just transfer the risk to one party as opposed to delegating it between many different parties, right? And having to manage each and every one. So, you know, there's associations out there like the DBIA, so it's like very prominent now. And so the relationship, you know, when I first started with architects was like, okay, the architect works for the owner, I work for the owner, there's not going to be much collaboration per se contractually, again, going back to what we were talking about. But now with, now architects are not only like our partners, but they're also they used to be our clients, like we would go to them for business development items, but now it's like they're working for GCs. So it's a very different model that the industry, I think, is getting used to, and really ties the entire, if you think about the commercial real estate development spectrum, it ties the entire group together, right? So whoever in this group is thinking about architecture, civil engineer, or GC, like you're gonna be working together regardless, because design build is gonna happen. Even if it's not design build, you work together in some form or fashion, to Jericho's point.
Yeah. Yeah, I found like on the business development side that ultimately I'm creating relationships a lot of times with the GCs more than I ever used to, to pursue projects together, to form teams that would pursue a project with a potential owner as a unified team. Whereas before we would go in as a consultant team, knowing the GC would pursue separately. So that's been a big change actually over the last couple of years as we've seen more design build and progressive design build become more common in the industry.
Yeah. So there'll be projects and pursuits, sorry if I'm jumping in, but like, you know, we'll present a team. Like it would be, all right, it would be HITT Contracting, Kimley-Horn, and Mackenze. That's your team. We're gonna design this thing and we're gonna build it. Client, please hire us over X, Y, and Z, right? So it's very collaborative.
Yeah.
And it helps too in terms of going in with a more real number in terms of what we think the project might cost, what our RFP, what we're proposing is going to cost, the client to hire us, right? Because the 3 of us are working together based in our own lanes of expertise around, material costs versus entitlement costs and, groundwork costs. So like having that all as one unified team makes a huge difference in terms of what gets presented to the client.
Any questions so far on this? We've talked about a few different ways of designing and building projects. We haven't gotten into like things like what's a design phase. So yeah.
Is there a difference between the GC, CM versus like construction management at risk?
CM at risk versus GCC.
Oh. I'll be honest, I don't know the clear difference because I haven't been part of CMARs, but
I mean, I would think, in my experience with CMARs, most CMARs require a GMP, or
Right.
guaranteed max
I was
price.
gonna say that.
And so, you are, at whatever you come on board to win the project, you're saying, hey, if it's 60%, for example, you're getting brought on, or 30%, you're saying, hey, we're gonna build this project at this price. Regardless of whatever the changes are, this is your guaranteed max price. There's still some change orders, but it can't be like, oh, we dismiss this on the plan for this kind of thing. So I think that's probably the biggest difference is, most, CMARs are usually associated with the GMP. But
And then to caveat on that, so really the contracting process and when a team member comes on board is all about risk management and when that occurs, right? So if you're the developer, as soon as you can put cost risk in a contract in front of someone, that's what drives what that method delivery is. The terms that you would learn in a textbook or different things are a lot different, but just think of when is the developer or owner comfortable in transferring the risk, and when that becomes contractual, that develops how that scenario works. But all the principles that they're talking about now is how that integration and relationships go there. Because oddly enough, I was talking to somebody about this, but a lot of what we do in real estate is also contracts and reading contracts and limiting liability not only for your firm, but also translating the risk from the owner or developer so that when something goes wrong, who has to pay is there. And so if you're in the industry, you're going to learn a lot about contracts, and it's something that probably surprised a lot of us in industry eventually but you just kind of get good at that, and you have to understand, whose liability is it, and then who's going to pay for it. Because there's no excess budget, right? Because the only thing that we don't cover in the series, right, is kind of the financing capital portion of that. And all of that matters on when the contract is executed, who is it with, and where the liability of cost is. So they're all pretty similar. And maybe the follow-up question is relationship-wise, what happens when this goes well and what happens when it goes wrong, right? Because a lot of what they've learned on these panels is relationships matter.
Yeah.
You already brought up, Tony, of bringing a team in and hey, we work well together, we can serve a client like that. But maybe talk a little bit about the integration between the three of you, on a day-to-day basis.
I think it depends on the delivery type again, but design and build, I'll just start with, there's a lot of meetings because we have to coordinate amongst our design build team to make sure that the plan is cohesive and includes everybody's input from a design standpoint before we present it to a client, right, per se. So say the client wanted to change a room to from an office to a sound studio or something like that. We have to collectively look at that and see what the impacts are and then present it. So meetings on top of meetings for meetings, I should say. So you're on calls coordinating that so that when you meet with the client, you're presenting the same option. So we're on design build, you're spending a lot of time together, whether in person or on calls, working together.
Yeah, I mean, kind of going along with that, if the client comes to the architect and says, I want, skylights in all my roofs of my building, we don't just do it for the client versus if it was, the more traditional where we were contract structuring to the client, we would do that and the contractor would deal with it. Now we take that, GC's in that same meeting, we go back as a team, you analyze cost, compare that to GMP if that's part of it already, and be okay, well that's an increase of this. I mean, it's an answer for us to do the change, whatever change to the construction budget, and then we have to present those numbers to the client and say, do you really want to do that? Versus just, that kind of
change.
Yeah, there'd be less communication around that change, and the contractor would be raising their hands of wait a minute, this is a big deal where we weren't ready for this, versus it's a more collaborative effort in terms of that response.
I'm going to pivot a little bit because I took the question maybe a little bit a different way, and I think it's how do we work together and when is it well and when does it maybe fall off a little bit, right? I think when we work together, when something goes wrong and we work together to find a solution to the problem is when we all are well, right? When we all want to be problem solvers at the end of the day, right? And it's a built environment, so things are not always going to go as planned, right? So whether that issue is a design thing that they just talked about, or something in the field isn't working out, or whether it be, you know, hey, your plans had a bust and then whatever, right? Like, if when we're working well together and we have really strong relationships, I get the call, right, from Tony that's like, hey, we found this solution, we work together, and then we present it together to the client, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, hey, we found this thing, we already came up with a solution, Tony's gonna sign a dollar amount, and then maybe where it kind of is like, okay, whose fault is it, responsibility there? But because we came forward with a solution, I always think about design and kind of everyone, right? We're not problem describers, we're problem solvers. And so if you just go to a client or whoever and you just say, hey, this is broken, or hey, this doesn't work, or hey, I don't like this, everyone's kind of mad, because you're like, what do I do with it, right? But when we're problem solvers and say, hey, I found this, here are 2 options to solve it, which one do you think works better? Can you figure out the cost, or can you figure out that? Like, I think, you know, all of us have been the solution. I'll say, like, when I get an RFI that's like, there's no proposed solution, or there's nothing, I'm like, come on guys, like, work with me here, right? But when I get an RFI, and like, I'm not saying that the response might be right, but it's like, hey, this could work. Then I'm like, oh great, now we're a partnership, now we're working together, we get to a solution faster, so it's in the better interest of the client, and usually it ends up costing less money, because they usually gave us the most cost-effective option. And so, as far as the relationship goes, and I think that kind of goes back to Tim's point and some of the different methods, is they can be a little bit of adversarial as far as the idea of, like, you know, if you're in one where it's like, okay, hey, these 2 pipes don't connect, what do we do? Well, now if there's finger pointing, right, then no one's winning. And so when the relationship kind of deteriorates or isn't at its best, nobody looks good. And so having really strong relationships so we all can look good is really kind of the goal, but it doesn't always happen.
Yeah. Yeah, I was gonna say, like, you know, when that happens, when the finger pointing happens, everybody loses, right, including the client. So that's why I think a lot more projects are going design build, because it forces us contractually to work together, right? So, because there have been projects in the past that were design bid build, and there'd be a gap in the pipe or something, and I'm like, all right, owner, here's your $1 million change order, it's gonna add a month to the schedule. And they're gonna be like, well, why are you sending me this? And then they'll go to civil and be like, hey, why is there a gap here? You have to pay for this money. And then it becomes a weird contractual dispute. Whereas, and then it creates the adversarial relationship where, like, well, I'm not gonna pay for it. Well, I'm not gonna pay for it. The owner's not gonna pay for it. And then you get into disputes. So that's what everybody wants to avoid.
Yeah, it allows us as a design team to be more proactive around, you know, problems as they arise or before they arise versus reactive, you know, in terms of a surprise or whatever, or a change from the client, or, you know, something that needs to change design-wise because of code, or because of, you know, we find some pipe in the ground that wasn't supposed to be there, you know, that, like, we can circle the wagons, figure out some solutions, present that to the client and be like, hey, we vetted this, you know, there's 2 ways around this. One costs $1 million and doesn't change your building size. The other one changes your building size by 10,000 square feet.
Yeah. And the only one thing I would add to that is, in terms of building relationships, that you want to, I like to go out and be social with the team, because you build really good, strong social connections that you can then draw on when things get hard.
I mean, it's a lot easier to call somebody that you know to have a hard conversation than a person you've never met in person, you never looked them in the eye, to call them and have to be like, hey, we found a mistake, right? Like, that's a hard conversation if I don't have no idea who you are. It's a hard conversation if I do know you are, but if I know your kid's name and I know that you're a person, right? Like, I think that's my one, like, relationship advice is, like, everyone's got a whole life behind them, right? And I think sometimes when you're just sending an email back and forth on the phone call, it's the big scary client, or it's the GC that, you know, is making me mad today, right? And you, like, but when you remember that, oh, it's Tony, and, like, we grabbed a beer last week and it's all cool, right? Like, those relationships are a lot easier to navigate. And so investing and building in those, and you're gonna come up together, right? Like, the person that's sitting next to you today, and sure, you know, you're just doing CAD in your respective companies, but there will be a time when you guys are, you know, trying to solve an RFI together, and it'll be much more helpful if you have a relationship that you can lean back on.
Great. I think I'm going to open it up to questions. Did you have something to say?
Somebody.
No.
Okay.
I was giving you basic goal is like we gotta start wrapping it up soon.
Yeah,
That was it.
that's what I thought. Okay, we're wrapping it up now, so we'll open it to questions if people have
Would you
questions.
say the scale of a project is a big determining factor on whether or not it's going to be design build or design bid build? Like for smaller projects, typically DBB, and then the bigger they get, the more DB they get, or is it just because you guys' relationship obviously is going to last so much longer on a larger scale project? So I feel like that relationship is so much more important.
Yeah. I'll take it first. Short answer is no. Like in terms of like, you know, right now I'm on a design build project that's 400 square feet because the client wants to convert an office into like a secure space.
Yeah.
So they would come to me because they want to just, again, single source it so that they can just say, hey, I want this box, you guys design and build it. And then you have large scale campus projects that are design build, or, you know, data centers, for example, where again, it's the same concept. So I don't think there's a scale. It goes back to the risk that Jericho was talking about, depending on its risk management, but also time and schedule, right? So in theory, with the design build, you can get the process starting a little bit quicker with a lot of the coordination and collaboration quicker, as opposed to waiting for the design to be done, the bid to be completed, right? And
So you're kind of like front loading costs for more transparency and just a smoother operation, essentially.
yeah, and distributing the risk.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't think there's not a scale. It's just depending on how they want to deliver it.
Yeah, and it's what the client is comfortable with, like in terms of who they have on their staff, in terms of expertise. Like if they don't have anyone that's good at kind of managing a project, they can give that to the GC and then they just handle all the contracts and all that. Or if they don't want to hire an owner's rep to do that for them, that would be kind of it's going to just depend on the client.
The only thing I'll layer in is like, also depends on the region of the country that you are. I would say Pacific Northwest is maybe like lagging a little bit in like how forward and we're using design build. There's areas of the country where people have been heavily using design build for 10, 20 years, and that's the primary source of which they do work. And whereas this is not relatively new, but it's becoming more common in the Pacific Northwest and Puget Sound.
Yeah, and there's regions that are still stuck in design bid build world, like the government and the DC area, right? That's their process. They're going to stick to it.
Yes?
I have a question. What do you guys love about your job? What do you hate about your job? And would you do something different?
Oh, geez.
It's 3 parts, so you can pick one or the other. You can say you don't hate anything about it, but share some personal stories.
Yeah. I guess I can start. So kind of tying back to what Tim initially started talking about is, you know, you're building people's, you know, concepts and things like that. And coincidentally, I was just reading this old chat from a friend back in, when I first started, back in 2009. And what I told her was like, hey, I really like my line of work because I'm literally building people's dreams, right? So it sounds corny because you're building people's dreams, but that's the reality. Depending on the project, depending on the client, whether a developer, if they're in it for money, some clients are in it for, you know, community service or things like that. And so in some way, it's their dream. So you're literally taking their money, or however they collect the money when it comes to debt and all that stuff. But like taking that and they're putting the onus on us to build their dreams physically, right? So somebody at some point dreamed of this office. And so they came to us, the AEC community, and said, hey, design this for us and build it. And here we are, all collectively kind of sitting in here and concretely, literally sitting in place. So that's what drove me to really stick with the industry, and why I love it is because, right, you're building people's dreams, but literally you're building things that people are experiencing life in, whether it's a restaurant, or whether it's a auto shop if your car breaks down, whether it's a high-rise building that people see on a skyline view. Like, that's very fulfilling for me. That's what drives me. So that's what I love about it. I'll go back to what I hate about it later.
Getting on a high note.
Yeah, I guess for me, mine has, I think, grown over the last 10 years from just that concept of taking an idea and making it a physical reality, into realizing how important, like we've harped on or talked about it multiple times already, but the relationships that are fostered by being able to do that, right? Because me as an architect, I can't do, the projects are so complicated now, right? There's no one person that's going to do any single project anymore. And so realizing how important that network and those relationships that are, you know, garnered by working on a project together or going to events like this or getting involved in, you know, other organizations in Seattle, CREDAWA or otherwise, you know, like that part for me is like what's really continuing to keep me in this industry, because like 2017, I was ready to leave architecture because I was at a firm that wasn't encouraging me to be connected. It wasn't, like, I was like, am I gonna do this for another 25 years? Like, what is, like, I'm just gonna be repeating the same model over and over. And, you know, I switched to a different firm and like found that connection. You know, I joined CREDAWA, like, and that's just really opened my eyes to like what our industry is actually about. So that's kind of why I'm still here, enjoying it. So.
The thing I love about it is the thing I hate about it. It's just one and the same.
Okay.
I love problem solving. That's part of the reason I went into engineering. Actually, I wanted to be an architect, but anyone that knows your history of the early aughts, I was going into school about 2009 and decided maybe that's not where I should invest my time. So,
a rough time.
yeah, it was a rough time. So I was like, yes, I'm going to build roads because we always need roads, right? Then I did that for a little bit, but I love problem solving, and so when I get to come in, no day looks the same for me, right? Some days I come in and I can have my day mapped out, but there will be a contract issue that comes across my desk, or an RFI, or there's a personnel thing that happens, or there's a new site that I have to figure out how the wetlands work, or there's a variety of things that will happen. Every day is different, and I love getting able to do that and the creativity of it that I never thought I would get to do as an engineer, which is pretty cool. At the same time, like, I would kill for a day that like had some predictability and like some kind of like structure that can be hard some days. So like I said, I think most days I love it, but the days where I'm like, oh, this is really hard, are the days when I'm like, oh, I set out with my to-do list of 5 things today, and it's the end of the day, I've got none of them done, and I have more.
Chris?
Me?
Yeah.
Oh, I thought I was just the moderator. What I love about this job is that we sit at this kind of intersection of community and business, right, and the public. So we're creating spaces together that will really impact how cities develop over time and how people live and work and recreate. And so we've got this opportunity from where we sit around to influence how things get financed, to influence or have a voice in how cities think about, you know, their future in terms of talking to city governments about how they think about planning or revenue or whatever, and community members about what's important to them and how they want to live in cities. And so I think that Venn diagram, and with sort of the commercial real estate groups kind of at the center of that, it's a really incredible place to be, because it is this real pivot that impacts urban life for a large variety of people. It's amazing to be in those discussions, providing expertise and providing you know, our thoughts that influence those, anything from policy to finance to the public realm. And I think that's what's really exciting about this job. I hate invoicing. That's what I hate invoicing. I hate ASRs. So there you go. Yeah.
All right. I think we got time for one question. Anybody got a burning question? If not, I always have one. Go ahead, Matt.
Because you guys have to work, we're all at different disciplines here, what would be like a piece of advice that you would give to the other disciplines so that we can help be better team players?
Good question, because I was going to ask like what the map is of in terms of what everybody's doing, because we all have internships. But
How many people are engineers?
Yeah.
How many people are in either development or property management, brokerage?
Or real estate, yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
How many contractors?
GCs.
What have we missed?
Raise your hand for
Architects.
subs too. Raise your hand. And then we have architects.
Architects.
Architects too, right? That's the whole thing.
All of it.
Yeah, that's awesome. So,
Got some brokers in there too, right?
yeah. I was gonna say, like, you know, with the broad spectrum of real estate development, right, it's wide. So for the longest time, when I was at my previous company, I was there for 10 years, so kind of going back to what Tim was alluding to, you know, we were just in our silo working with who we wanted to work with and didn't really look at the entire spectrum in terms of like, okay, we can work with the finance folks, we can work with the developers, we can work with the land use attorneys. So like when you take a step back and look at the entire spectrum, you're gonna realize like you guys are all working, we're all working together, right? And so we've kind of harped on networking and making connections, but that's really what drives the industry and makes it fun, right? Because, you know, not every day's fun to what we talked about, and you're gonna get into disputes and things like that, but, you know, you're gonna have to lean on the people and the connections that you make. So kudos to you all in terms of like, you know, coming here and putting yourself out there, because at some point, there's gonna be somebody in this room that you're gonna lean on and be like, hey, I need some help on this, right? So I guess my advice, going back to your question, Matt, was it? Going back to your question is just be open-minded and aware that, you know, even if you're not contractually working together, you're part of the same full spectrum, right? So make those connections, don't burn bridges, don't try to make somebody else look bad because this community is small, especially Seattle, right, the region, it's gonna come back to bite you. And you're not gonna either get work, nobody's gonna work with you and things like that, right? So just keep that in mind. You're building your company brand, but you're also building your personal brand.
Yeah, I've got, I guess, I'll do two things. One is, and I'm not good at this either all the time, is pick up the phone. Like,
Yes.
call the person. You can send an email, but call them too, right? Follow up that phone call with an email if you need to, but that phone call makes the difference in terms of tone, just the relationship of that, you know, whichever direction it's going, right? Because that, your voice or in person makes a huge difference to the relationship, to the problem solving and all that. And in speaking to that, the other point that everyone in this room is going to grow up in this industry together. Mm-hmm. So like keep in contact with each other, because you are going to help each other succeed. Like that is how I continue to succeed, is reaching out to other people in my network. Like when the industry, you know, and economy goes down, someone's going to get laid off, right? And if you don't have people to reach out to, you don't have people to help you, right? And you don't have to do it alone. So
I'm gonna answer, but I'm gonna give Kendall a heads up. She did the internship program 2 years ago, so I want her to answer too.
the eyes widen.
Yeah, so like, you think about it for a second.
No pressure.
I want
This goes you.
Yeah,
So,
no.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. I think for me, it's probably just like the curiosity for it, right? Of understanding. I think one of the best calls I ever got, or the most fun calls I ever got, was I had a client at a developer, and I got a call that said, hey, I actually don't understand what civil engineers do. Can you and I sit down for, you know, an hour and can you explain to me what you do? And I was like, yeah, absolutely, right? And we sat down and I talked him through approaching a grading problem, utilities, entitled, like we talked through everything. And now we do that quarterly of just like, and he has a running list of questions of like, all right, what do I do with this and how's this and what's this and that? And building that relationship of like, he kind of like, he's like, I'm not afraid to ask you the dumb question because I know that you'll like level with me. And so that curiosity at all levels, you know, I'll still call my fire protection person and be like, explain to me how this thing works. Like, what's this work? And I think that goes a long way of like kind of checking your ego at the door. No one expects you to know everything. And, you know, I call the GCs all the time too of being like, okay, hey, can you walk me through how you're actually going to build this so I can make sure I'm helping you? Like, and how it improves how I'm doing my plans and it's improving all of that. And so just like a really healthy level of curiosity and like checking your ego, I think goes a long way.
Yeah, and I know you're looking at me because I recently, like, I'm only a year in, so, you know, you don't know what you don't know, but I have gotten calls from clients and I have gotten calls from general contractors, which is a really fun call to get, especially when they don't tell you that they're calling. So, super fun. I think starting out, the biggest thing that you can do and, like, the best advice that I could give on how to get through that is, like, your best sentence is, I don't know, but I will figure it out.
Yep.
And like, I will talk to my people, I will get you an answer. And coming at it from that standpoint of doing things that way and then being open, like when we had a contractor call us, talking to us about dirt and everything, it is like, let me see what I can do, let's solve the problem together, and like, I'll get back to you and collaborate and do things like that. So coming also to other people with collaboration, and yeah, just honest.
Great.
Kendall was sitting in this room 2 years ago, not this one specifically, but
Yeah.
He was in the internship program.
Internship
program.
So,
yeah.
okay.
Well, thanks,
I
everyone.
think that wraps it up.
Yeah.